There's no like, no.
No, there's nothing, take one.
Maybe marketing can splice
They
that.
should, I know, they're going to totally, that's right, 3D render, like the better versions of us.
Right.
I'm excited for today's conversation. I have a good friend of mine and very interesting corporate innovation guy, Raj Banga here. I'd love for you to just share a little bit about your background and how you got to the work you're doing today.
Sure. Excellent. Thank you, Pat. Gosh, you talk about an industry that went through digital transformation. I mean, it was architecture when when AutoCAD exploded. And I'll kind of start maybe at that point. I was a graduate of Virginia Tech School of Architecture, Bachelor of Architecture. Thought I'd just kind of be following that road, whether it's residential work, commercial work. I was doing all of that when I got out of school. And then, in the early 90s, around that time when we were going through a bit of a recession, I vividly remember this was one of those red dots on my timeline that glows. I came back from lunch one day and I was consulting with an architect, just doing some side residential work. We were doing a Girl Scouts headquarters. And I just came back from lunch one day and he had this red box on his desk, and he had this giant machine. And I said, what the heck is this? And he basically said, in some colorful language, much older guy, you and I have got to focus in on this. And it was a box of AutoCAD software from Autodesk, and the machine was a big plotter. Never seen a plotter before. And so sure enough, a few weeks later, I went and took up a training course with a local CAD reseller. And at the time, I thought, what better way for me to know what's going on with all the other design firms, large or small, whatever industry, whatever their specialty was. I would have some, insight. Well, actually, let me rewind a little bit. During that training, I picked up on it very quickly. I mean, I just had much a greater ease at learning AutoCAD than I thought I would have. So I left my resume with them, just thinking about if other architecture firms are coming in and looking to hire. I was looking for more of a permanent type of gig. And lo and behold, about a month later, they called me and made me a job offer to come be an architectural specialist to train other architects and engineers on how to use AutoCAD. So yeah, I kind of skipped over that, but now coming fast forward, at the time I thought, well, what better way for me to know what kind of firms I like, the kind of work that they're doing, other than being a trainer and getting in, under the hood of these firms and training them. And these guys were young, they worked hard, played hard, super smart folks, but the musician in me, a drummer, a long time musician, there was a guitar player there was a keyboard player there. So we were still, had our own little band thing, but we were learning technology as that world of technology, as it's impacting the design industry, was just at the forefront.
Yeah.
I would go into design firms and teach them how to use AutoCAD. And I remember DDI, the company I ended up working for, they had one computer that had an email address for the whole company. And that's how they exchanged. This is, I'm installing AutoCAD with 27 3.5-inch discs. This is still DOS. Windows wasn't even out. Boom, AutoCAD for Windows came out. This is major digital transformation stuff happening. So that was where the technology side and whatever acumen I bring to the table in that world today, that's when the seed was planted. It was really going in and learning AutoCAD, and not just architects. I was training engineers, civil engineers, electrical, mechanical, plumbing. I was learning all those other disciplines of software and training a whole slew of people, traveling nationally, all over the country doing that. That was the origin of me, what I'm still doing today. I'm not a deep technologist. I'm not a programmer. You and I have talked about this before,
Yeah.
but I know the language. And even today, there continues to be this gap between the people that are maybe not technologically savvy, but live in that world, and the world of programming and development and writing code. And there's that space in the middle, which is where I live.
You know, when I think about my career in software being what I would say a non-traditional software person,
Yes.
you know, there's this kind of projection of the traditional architecture, and even the terms architect and engineer, you know, are very misapplied in software, right? A lot. And so, you know, understanding these roles, and I, very similar to what you were talking about in the 90s, when I was on the graphic design side of that equation, where everything was getting taken over in a matter of just a few years, from traditional stack cameras and all of that into, you know, the computer aided design. The folks that were really, you know, picking up that easily were, I remember older designers like, that's not graphic design. You know, whatever it is you're doing is not that. And I totally can imagine that same thing as you were in architecture saying, well, that's not using a model. And when I was at Jacobs Engineering, they were moving to whatever was Borland's model-centric design, even away, like the first full 3D renderings. And I just remember at that time, yeah, there was this very strong old guard that was just totally against any of the new technology. And even the same conversations you hear now, 25 years ago, people were saying, well, that's going to replace, you know, all of our jobs, or that kind of thing. And it's a very palpable, you know, thing in some of those inflection points. But I remember you talking about, you know, when I think about these kind of sea waves or sea changes, these tidal wave changes that come so quickly, and things that happen in an analog kind of world, or the transition from analog to digital. And I remember you were telling me about an experience you had with the PalmPilot and applications. And when people think about mobile today, I think, you know, again, like just kind of generalization, people aren't even referencing that level of handheld. Can you maybe talk about some of because you were seeing some early themes of insights, it seemed to me, on that first generation of what could a device be, and what's the background on that project?
Well, that is absolutely the next big red dot on the timeline. So, you know, here I am working for a CAD, computer aided design reseller, but still in my heart of hearts, there was this tug pulling me. You know, I was still an architect. I didn't feel like I was really a computer person. And one of our clients, you know, a local design firm, they became a client of ours. I took them into the digital age, a group of about 70 people, taught the whole company how to use AutoCAD, even taught them how to use all the Office products, but they ended up making me an offer to come work for them and being a bit of a technologist inside of the design firm. Well, this was like a dream at the time. Okay, so I can still label myself as an architect and, you know, come back to that design firm, but do technology. And then that was kind of a story in and of itself. But anyway, went to the design firm and just ended up now sort of stuck in these two worlds: technology, design, technology, which one? And the founder of that CAD reseller that I work with ended up leaving the company. And to me, he was one of our local, younger than me, but he was kind of the local little Steve Jobsian kind of character. Brilliant mind. He left to go start up a company called iBright that was going to develop software for the handheld. And the handheld at the time, I mean, Nokia was the big phone, but Palm was every week getting more and more popular. It was still ultimately, as you and I remember, maybe a little bit of an address book. They did innovate. You know, they were one of the early handheld devices. They had character recognition software. You could write with a pen.
I remember.
You know, so that was very innovative at the time. But yeah, he and I just worked well together. He wanted me to come co-found the company with him. And the vision, you know, when you look at the business plan at the time, was really getting data onto the handheld because of the internet. This is so, what is this, 90, 96, 7, 8, I guess, 98. The internet was still not what
Wasn't
it's
all there
become.
yet. Yeah.
Wasn't all there yet. So, but ultimately, we were trying to get that handheld device to do something more than be a glorified address book.
Hmm.
Those apps for the handheld. Well, fast forward, we were successful in raising a couple of rounds of financing. At the end of the day, we had about 28 people working for that company, and we had raised a little over just under $10 million. So we were humming, but again, transformation was happening. And on the
Yeah.
last few pitches in that last year of the company, the question became, because we were ultimately creating carry away information.
Hmm.
Um, we're trying to put the internet, but the Palm was still tethered to your computer. You'd have to sync
Yeah.
from the computer to the Palm. And the questions became during these next periods of funding, well, so what are you guys going to do when wireless comes along?
Hmm.
802.11b, that was,
Oh
that
yeah.
was, yeah, and Bluetooth didn't even sound like anything real at the time, even
Hmm.
though that word was being thrown around. And, we just didn't have a real answer to that. We didn't know what wireless was really going to become.
Hmm.
Still no such thing as an iPhone or an iPad or an
Hmm.
iPod. None of those were. I think the iPod might have been around right towards the tail end of that. Microsoft was dabbling with, what was it, the Dune? I think that music player,
Oh
that
yeah, the
media format.
Zoom.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. So it was right around that time frame, but suffice it to say that little juncture in time, wasn't married, didn't have kids, lived the startup world, the startup
Take a lot of
culture.
risk.
It took some risk, didn't have, it actually didn't feel like much risk, didn't have
Yeah.
that much responsibility there. So we lived hard for a year and year plus, didn't have a salary for a long time, but once the funding started and we had office space, we thought we were onto something. Um, I will end the story here now, but just give you a little example of what we were pitching. So at one point, we had an opportunity to talk to Ted Leonsis.
Wow.
And we were asking him, I forget how we made that connection, but we were going to go in there and we were going to put the Washington Capitals roster onto the PalmPilot. We thought, how amazing would it be to just know what's going on with the sports figures, to take that
Hmm.
website and put it on your Palm, and then it grew into, here we are in DC. How do we get the political parties under the site onto a handheld with carry away information? The AOL, there was an AOL Marriott um, co-branding thing happening at the time. And, we were thinking Pat Sheridan reserves a hotel in Nashville and a Marriott. You used to get the email with the confirmation number. And we
Hmm.
mocked this whole thing up. Click here to download your itinerary to your Palm.
Hmm.
So not only would you have the address of the hotel and your reservation number and all that, but because they were partnered with AOL and AOL had the whole, had owned all the content.
Hmm.
Remember Movie Phone? We would have a listing of all the movies that were playing in Nashville at the time. Golf courses,
Hmm.
restaurants, but you were, able to carry that away on your PalmPilot.
I think it's so interesting because,
It's crazy.
being strapped to the front of that train from the 90s of the internet just becoming a thing,
Yeah.
and having a front row seat on, that whole dynamic where at first there's no wireless, so it has to be connected with a cord.
Yep.
And then there's Wi-Fi, but it's really in offices or it's like B2B. And then when the dam breaks, when it's really full kind of B2C, and having that, kind of layer to put on the business model of, okay, there's like Netflix, everyone talks about, before you can do high bandwidth streaming, we send you DVDs. So they have their low bandwidth business strategy.
Yep.
And then once they can time where the market flips, then they just move from those physical media and into all streaming. And I mean, I think as we kind of shift over, maybe we talk about a little bit what you're doing today, but when I talk to, these kind of change leaders like yourselves, there's a lot of common themes around having a startup experience, right? Like working in a traditional industry and kind of understanding the disruption of this digital or new technology. And you've just covered so many of these themes here just in this kind of opening conversation, but then also seeing how the role of bandwidth, you can have all the hardware in the world, but if you can't get the data to it, right, or if it's super expensive to get data, to see the business models evolve. When we shift over to what you're doing today, can you maybe give folks a little just background and context on what's the industry, what's the company, how would you describe your role?
What I'm doing today.
Yeah, what you're doing today.
Yeah. So today, fast forward, did the startup thing that, it was a victim of the dot-bomb era, and then life just sort of stabilized. I went back to being an architect, managed lots of big projects, got married, had our daughter, and life was good. But the technology was always kind of speaking to me. Well, here we are, maybe 5 years ago, maybe even a little bit more, maybe longer, but from my perception, I was, again, starting to get pulled back towards wanting to focus on technology. Could have been that the commercial real estate space I was in, just classic, starting to feel a little burnt out on that. But I remember telling my wife, I'm really hungry to get back into a technology-focused role. So much has been happening over the last 5-6 years in CRE, the commercial real estate space, which I know, not to mention just the explosion of the world of apps and all these other technologies that have happened over the last maybe 10 years now, I'd say. And so fast forward a couple of relationships, I met, Jeremy here at Bialek, and here you've got a young guy with a strategy background looking to not necessarily digitally, but looking to transform and take his family business to greater heights and do some new things beyond what they've been known for 40 years, which is the contract furniture space, providing design, goods, and services to government agencies, healthcare, and private sector all around contract furniture and furnishings. Here he is looking to see, well, what else is down the road for us? And so here I am looking to sort of not only kind of transform myself again, if you will. And the two of us met, a lot of great energy. And because I know the design space and know that furniture space from all the commercial real estate background, have an aptitude, if you will, on the technology side, probably, much more so maybe than him. But we just kind of formed this new role, and it's a title that you're seeing, Director of Technology Innovation. You could call it whatever, Transformation Innovation Officer, or whatever these titles might be. But that's what it's about. Innovation is in that title. He felt it was important for it to be in that title. So that's, here it is, 2.5 years. This, mind you, this was all pre-COVID, this conversation.
Totally different, yeah.
And so Jeremy and I were already focused on what's around the corner for us, for this business, for this industry. Do you play, are we going to play the role of disruptor in a certain piece of it? Or are we just going to innovate in the core business? This might answer a question down the road, but as I was thinking about this conversation, there's a really interesting thing that you have to remember, that what might seem transformative, if you're thinking digital transformation or even just innovation, what might feel to be transformative and innovative might be true to your company, but at in a large, from a much larger viewpoint, maybe it's not that innovative. There's already so many things happening out there, but it might feel very transformative to our group.
Sure.
So there is
that thing. I think on that dynamic, I used to, especially kind of growing up in the aura of Steve Jobs and using all the Apple products and being so focused on that company launching these new category defining things. Right. And so it had me, I would think about innovation as like a pyramid where the pointy part of the top is like this new transformative thing. But the more I spend time working in, just kind of all these different industries and size companies, a lot of innovation is just at the bottom of the pyramid. It's the thing that may seem mundane, to your point, to others, but it makes, the thing that makes the battleship get 1 more mile per gallon, well over 10,000, you know what I mean? Whatever it is, right? And
I'll give you a good example of a current
yeah,
one that I think lands right in that sweet spot. This world of electronic signatures, right? Just
mhm.
e-signing documents and contracts. Nothing terribly innovative about that right now, but by any means. Our business is a very complex business. And when I send you a proposal for your, Modus's new headquarters, whatever,
Mhm.
there's a lot of parts and pieces that make up that proposal. There's drawings, there's visual exhibits, there's
Mhm.
normal legalese documentation, there's installation, there's a whole
Yeah.
series of different kinds of documents and different size documents, digitally or physically, whatever they may be. And bundling all that together and using an electronic signature mechanism in all the places that you want it in this single document, it's more complex than you might think would have to
Oh,
be.
yeah.
And I've had conversations with all of them out there, all the DocuSigns, Adobes, Pandas, and interestingly enough, no one quite has the solution that we're looking for.
I think about things like buying a house and notaries and all these things that, DocuSign or that type of technology could just add. People would think of having to go to a notary like they would going to a bank to deposit a check, right? I
Right,
mean, kind of
right.
understanding this kind of administrative heavy. And I think, again, when I, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but in a sense, your value proposition at Bialek to the market, you have a combination of products and services.
That's correct.
And so, within that, and then you have this kind of partner channel ecosystem where they then have contracts, right? So you guys are kind of facilitating, it's very complex, multi-dimensional offering that has legal contracts but the other thing I think that's interesting that you mentioned is that, okay, so then once that building gets built out or that hospital and all those doorknobs get put in place, then down the road, the assets of, oh, we need to replace, what model thing did we even have? All of that data is buried in a contract in a spreadsheet attachment. Now that could be in some kind of system. And so I think maybe help, just maybe help me or help folks listening kind of understand in terms of how you guys frame, how do you segment kind of a canvas for innovation and, kind of define things that would help the administrative, your customer experience might say, can we take the time it takes to complete this process from a month to a week to a day or what have you? How do you guys segment innovation and, how do you kind of make decisions there on what aligns best to the value prop you guys want to provide?
Well, value prop is probably an easier way for me to start to answer that question. But how to make decisions around timeline and cost investment and all that's still a little kind of loose. But it's a great segue to what I had, looked back on something that I presented to Jeremy. Number one, every year we definitely start off with goals for the year. Pretty
Mm-hmm.
normal sort of thing to do for businesses. But from a technology perspective, in my role, what I presented to Jeremy, at least for this year, what he and I talk about is what's needle moving, to use a cliche. What's really moving the needle. That was the theme that started the year. And as I was thinking about that, because that would be a focus, right? That would set the table that is this e-signature thing really needle moving?
Mm-hmm.
We could debate that, but that was sort of the theme. And as I thought about it, I said, okay, well, needle moving is a vague kind of term. What do you mean needle moving? And so the buckets that I put innovation or transformation under for myself, and I think this applies to other industries, not just our industry, but there's really three buckets that the needle moving innovation falls under for me. One is pure revenue generating.
Mm-hmm.
What is something, whether it's a process or a product or a service, really honing in on what's going to generate revenue, because
Mm-hmm.
there's plenty of digital transformation and innovation that might not directly impact the bottom line. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like the e-signature thing that we were talking about.
Yeah.
So that falls, the e-signature thing maybe falls under another bucket that I look at, which is client experience, the
Mm.
customer experience. Are we, is it sort of a differentiator? Are we doing things for our customer that they would never, they're not going to get anywhere else? The process of doing business with them,
Mm-hmm.
to use some of the cliches, is it more, are we frictionless? Is it
Mm-hmm.
easier to do work with us, to get projects off the ground, to manage projects, close them out, all of that? That's not immediately revenue generating. Yes, that could
Mm-hmm.
be a residual effect because your customer loves doing work with you, so you get more
Mm-hmm.
business from them. But that was another, bucket, if you will, of thinking, things we could build that are needle moving from the customer experience. And then the third one, which is also as important, and I would think it's maybe it's becoming even more and more important. I would ask you this for your own company,
Mm-hmm.
as the leader of your company, is your own people and culture.
Mm. Employee experience, right?
With recruiting right now, with the great resignation happening, and what do you do? What does a
Mm-hmm.
company do? What are some digital transformation
Mm-hmm.
efforts that maybe fall under that?
Yep.
So
Well,
ultimately, those three buckets were sort of the framework of what we would look at. And, being a small group here, but being very interested in every one of those things. And Jeremy and I have similar kind. We thought, well, let's pick kind of one of each and see which
mm-hmm.
one's really, because we had a whole list of ideas under each one of those buckets, but it became
Yeah.
an ideal framework for how we continue our dialogue around these things.
Whenever there's a customer service component to the business, or to your point, your ability to deliver on your value prop depends on other partners to like deliver things on time, things that are outside of potentially the command and control of your firm.
Yeah.
And understanding that, and I can totally see this kind of direct correlation. I think, you mentioned the pandemic, and two components to that. I think it's one thing to be comfortable working distributed or remotely. It's quite another thing to be working under lockdown conditions, right? And trying to feel like supported, part of a team. Or if you're hiring new people, how do you really create a sense of welcoming versus just emailing them the employee manual, right? And I think those are very valuable things, especially like I mentioned with the service component business, because the happier your people are doing their work, that's going to translate, directly into your customers. So let me ask a couple questions just on that. I think this
Sure.
kind of this framework, there's a lot to dive in on here. So in terms of the customer experience, one of the things I find, in conversations with folks, what seems challenging is just to be able to maintain that feedback loop, to have some either alpha customer groups, or is it within your own kind of account leaders that are liaisons, so you don't feel like you're, kind of all over your clients all the time where they can't kind of breathe. How do you guys kind of look at that issue, and how, what are the kind of things that you guys look at in terms of knowing when to involve clients for feedback throughout the normal course of business? Are there opportunities or things you've layered in to try to get better, insight, move from assumption to kind of data on are the things we're doing adding value, from our clients' perspective?
Well, gosh, I think what immediately comes to mind is exactly what we engaged with Modus on about a year and a half now ago, which was getting your guidance and your team's tapping into your team skill set about helping us think of some of these transformative sort of ideas. And so what if you recall, what we did is we tapped into what we referred to as our real true friendlies, the
Mm-hmm.
clients who we love doing business with and have done it for years, and who really just there's a level of trust. It's gone more than just a vendor to client
Yeah.
relationship. And so we created this panel of, gosh, how many was it? Maybe 15 to 20 folks out there from all the different verticals that we really serve. Like I said, the government, space, healthcare, and private sector. Fortunate enough to have a few folks in each one of those, and they play different roles within their own agencies, which is an added benefit. So some are really more decision makers, some are really more boots on the ground, maybe really involved in the execution of the work that we're doing, and yeah, so from all levels. So it's good. It was great to get input on some of our ideas. And I will say, it was a bit across the board. With some of the responses we got from the varying degree, the varying positions of folks we were asking, some of the ideas we had, but just don't underestimate the fact that this was layered. The umbrella over this still was COVID. And so everyone didn't quite have a clear answer as to what some of these ideas that we were sharing with them, whether they were client experience ideas or what we could do with our team to better serve you. So that was kind of a bit of an internal and external, some external ideas there. But there were some different degrees of response to the different areas. So we didn't really have a clear direction. If you recall, we were still, okay, well, we've got a couple of different, and whittled down the list of ideas for us to focus on, but nothing really stood out. I will close that by saying, I think, the true transformers, this isn't any mind-boggling observation here, but the Steve Jobs of the world and the Hastings with Netflix, and I don't know, we could think of so many different things out there. What's her name? I just listened to a podcast with the founder of House. These people, they're really going to listen to their own gut. I think there's only so much external influence, I think, that you should be seeking to validate what you believe.
The best products you build for yourself, kind of.
In a way, you're really there. I personally believe that you've identified a problem in the industry or the space that it's a problem, and fortunately at this stage,
like Porsche doesn't build a pickup truck, right? I mean,
in a way, sure, yeah,
right.
Exactly. So there is that. It's a bit of a cliche, but you should sort of maybe trust your own instincts a little bit more, and a bit of that build it and they will come kind of thing. And
one of the things I've seen materialize for firms that share that belief is then we have to be able to build and test ideas more quickly, right? So that, we all have assumptions. We want to kind of build some of these things, but the ultimate reality is when we get it to market. So what is our ability, right, to gauge the organization's throughput? And when I do think about these modern metrics for innovation, it's very different in every business, every industry, every scale company. Like, what truly is throughput? In my experience, people look at developers and they struggle to learn a broader view. Well, if the developers are not getting throughput, it may be because the design has some miscalculated assumptions, or the requirements weren't fully baked, or there's kind of end to end looking at some of these things. There's a before we kind of jump on to other things, but I just curious, just because of where you guys sit in the market, what is your guys' sense of this post-COVID or hybrid work future? What are you seeing? Like, I would imagine you guys implicitly in the type of work you do have some very interesting vantage points and insights on what people are talking about with the future of the office, or offices that are set up more for collaboration and co-working than dedicated daily working. Are you feeling like you're seeing, through the work that you guys do, what companies are experimenting with on the future of work or the role of the office?
Well, yeah, I mean, absolutely. I can give you my 2 cents. You could sit there and Google it right now, and you're going to find just thousands of articles on this topic. So you're getting my opinion, but I'm going to rewind real quick just so I can, talk about the relationship with Modus.
Yeah.
If you recall, what we ended up doing with that exercise was realizing that there's still a pretty decent sized question mark out there. So why not embrace that?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the directions we were looking at going was, well, how do we help instead of prescribing a solution to companies, why not help them navigate the exploration of what the solution is? Because it may evolve over the period of time. So here we were seeking some sort of position,
like the Holy Grail position,
in the ground. Here's our stake in the ground. When we realized, well, again, yet another cliche that's out there: the one size doesn't fit all.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, one size doesn't fit all, even within an organization. Sometimes,
sure,
just company to company. But so that was a place that we landed that we felt very, very, comfortable and excited about. Well, fast forward now to where we are today, and all the larger players in the industry, the ones with deeper pockets, maybe, the brokers and larger CRE organizations of the world, they've really got a strong handle on how to help companies maybe think about hybrid, what it means to them. But the fact of the matter is, in my opinion, hybrid is here. I mean, it's here forever. Whether you're Modus Create and you're a company that has been remote first since day one, or you're maybe more like Bialek that does cater to the more physical built environment, there's going to be all shapes and sizes. So that is one thing we have all acknowledged. Our executive team, who I share lots of ideas with, and thinking about where we should go and what we should do. So our position is absolutely, it's here. The hybrid component is here, and it absolutely does not mean the same thing for one company to the next. And it absolutely may change over time. You may actually find yourself that, I'm actually building out, now that I'm going very international, I've acquired this company, I've got people here, keeping my culture intact. Maybe it's going to force you to build some kind of a office per se.
It's funny because a lot of people look at us and say, almost they assume we're like anti-office or something.
No.
Nothing could be more further from the truth. I mean, to me, I always enjoyed going to the office, but the office is close to my house, right? The office, to me, I get non-interruptive work time. At home, working from home, especially in the pandemic, you got kids, dogs, deliveries, right? There's a lot of things that, and you also, when I think about our experience with our first office in Romania, a lot of the folks who are hiring were kids, right out of school that had a small apartment. So they want to be cooped up in an apartment all day, right? For work and for personal life. And so there's just a stir crazy factor. One of the things I've learned talking to some of our colleagues in Europe, some bigger clients that we have in Germany, and they actually had to get change in laws to work from home. And when someone gets approved to work from home, then the company actually has to take air quality tests of their home office, sunlight, these other things, and then send them their work furniture to their house. Which I was thinking relative to what you guys do, that could be a boon, right? But wouldn't you love to have had a standing desk company in the middle of COVID, right? You know what I mean? There are real changes to, I think, to the future of work. And
to that point, Pat, think of what happened to Zoom in a matter of 6 months. Pre-COVID, someone might have mumbled Zoom in a conversation, and you might have heard of Zoom, and it might have been a bit of a novelty or something like that. Before you knew it, it was a household term.
Yeah.
That every generation, from kids in school to, people on the verge of retirement, were
Yeah.
adept at using. So
I can let me ask you this question, because this was my informal straw poll around Zoom and other companies. I had a couple of friends who said, yeah, early pandemic, I bought some DocuSign stock, some Zoom stock,
right.
And I said, that's fine. I'm sure Microsoft will catch up. And I just started to monitor like the number of Teams meetings versus Zoom meetings I would do, and I really started to notice over that 2 years that by the end of it, I was doing at least 50-50 Teams to Zoom meetings.
Right.
And which I think, to bring this back to our conversation kind of on innovation disruption, it's one of these things that I kind of feel that the disruptive technologies that can create this unicorn company, as quickly as they create an advantage for you, they also can get commoditized in this new world order, And, so taking this kind of, broad view, like you're talking about, instead of just trying to find the holy grail thing, which could be a needle in a haystack, the question is, like, how many haystacks can we look at? How many needles can we find? And even if we find a bunch of needles, which one are we going to move on? Let's maybe move the conversation to when you think about your team and you think about, or just kind of this capability at Bialek, you have a new executive coming in to kind of set, a new future direction for the firm, and wants to bring a consciousness to innovation, and you're going to kind of align that strategy to the tactics. So you are now, what are you, 2 years into your 2.5? Man, it goes by fast. So if you kind of think about this journey, a lot of the literature that I'm kind of reading, everyone's talking about 3 to 5 years for big companies to be able to kind of turn, at all.
Mhm.
And I think this concept of companies, all companies have their own pace that they can move. And if you try to move faster than that, in certain cases, a lot of the things are going to get gummed up in the work. So how do you see the job differently today than you did, 2.5 years ago when you were starting? Or do you feel like there's certain kind of natural plateaus in organizational learning? Can you maybe frame, like, from where you started, where did you think things, or what was the priority and focus? And now 2.5 years in, how would you describe, the relative maturity of the firm, or where you feel there's still work to do as you continue to develop this team at Bialek?
Well, let me see if I can approach that with the kind of what's resonating right now, or maybe two different ways to attack that question. One is, I would think, when you look at the purpose of what you're engaging here with me and others and talking about digital transformation, I think there's a beauty to being in the role that I'm in and kind of being the new kid on the block, and maybe always bringing a little bit of a outsider's perspective and sort of challenging. You're playing the role of a disruptor a little bit. Because you don't necessarily know the industry all that well. And so I think there's a true benefit to the company and to the role that I, or somebody in my shoes, would play. You get to kind of come in there and challenge the status quo.
Yep.
And that injects a lot of energy into the company by saying, yeah, actually, Raj, it's interesting you said, we talked about that 5 years ago, but sometimes you might hear them say, well, maybe we need to revisit that. Or you're hearing them say, like, the opposite. Yeah, we tried, that didn't work. There's just some power there.
Sure.
So there's that thin line of, like you were asking me, I've been here 2.5 years now. There's that thin line to try to straddle of how can you continue to maybe carry a little bit of that rebellious disruptor role versus, if I were to give some advice, I think you asked that earlier on, if I were to give some advice to getting into this, you do need to know the space a little bit. So you want to become familiar. I'm now very friendly with everyone on the digital team at Herman Miller. With this Miller Knoll merger now, I'm going to be meeting a lot of the folks from Knoll. Knoll's digital team wasn't as big as Herman Miller's, but I've increased my network. I know the industry a heck of a lot better. So that's good, but there's a little bit of that blessing and a curse, As far as another way of thinking about your question, I think the culture that we've built on our executive team, to its core, is we're all definitely on the same page. Everybody is hungry to continue to explore something different and something innovative and continue to have conversations around that. That is a great thing. So that's a powerful thing that we have together as a group. It's a very positive kind of thing. Where maybe we've got to learn a little bit and grow is what I think, was one of Modus's strengths, or having a partner like you, is the ability to, to select something, the fail fast kind of thing, experiment, prototype. That's something that I think we could be better at doing. There is a little bit still of that. That's the right answer? Yeah. Well, if it was the right answer, then everyone would have done it. We should be willing. You should be willing to embrace that route, knowing it may not be the right answer. It may not be the right thing, but giving it a shot. And so I think as a group, we could be, a little bit more adept at that.
I think this is one of the hardest things for any company to manage. I mean, I think about, and especially when you start getting people distributed, not in the same office where they can talk over lunch and talk casually, right? They're only communicating on Zoom meetings or, Slack conversations, where on one hand, you want to tap into this latent creativity that everyone has and this latent expertise that they have doing their piece of the work, right? And you have to balance that with, if you let 1,000 flowers bloom and then people realize, oh, after they've already spent their nights and weekends coming up with something they want to pitch or work or do whatever, and then they realize, oh, that wasn't the priority for this quarter, or that they may never volunteer their energy ever again, and so understanding that intake process, understanding even just the solicitation of ideas from the field is different than the triage of those ideas and prioritization onto how do we do things, but not to have such an overly prescriptive bureaucratic process that you can't move quickly. This is like the real paradoxes, I think, of this kind of work.
It absolutely is, Pat. I'm going to give you another, this great example popped in my mind. When we think of the three buckets as I've mapped them out for myself, if you think about client experience, for our business, it's comes down to our project management group. So you have to be able to look at what in the process of providing furniture, if I'm going to simplify it to that, for a 500,000 square foot client, nice big project. What are the steps along the way that we know we could do better? Well, who am I going to talk to about that? There's going to be nobody better to talk to about that than the head of my project management group, So on one hand, they're the expert, and that's a pro, but on the other hand, they're the expert, and that's the con. And now you're, not necessarily going to get the out of the box innovative thinking because, what's the phrase? You can't see the forest through the trees kind of thing. And then not to mention the fact that they're still so busy with the day-to-day work, the time investment needed in transformation. This is one of the challenges we had when we were working with you guys. It wasn't you, it was us.
Well, just bandwidth, just basic bandwidth.
We needed our time to be able to explore. And lo and behold, person X or Y couldn't join the meeting, and that, so that in and of itself, how do you run your day-to-day business and reserve that energy and commitment? Because it's mental energy. It's being physically present for that, mentally present, and being loose enough to be able to, okay, I need to do a quick little meditation, clear my mind, and get into a creative space. So that's a challenge.
And is there anything that you guys, and you just kind of pulling this conversation together across your teams, is there any kind of advice you would have for folks on what you think?
Well, I would think, and this happened to us on a couple of our executive meetings when we would do this, I would think just acknowledging the reality of that is the first step.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're going to book your weekly transformation sessions, if you're committing
Mm-hmm.
yourself to Q4 of this year, whether you bring an expert like Modus in to help guide you, or you're just a little bit before that,
Yeah.
you're just trying to just recognize that this is this can be an issue. So whatever techniques your business wants to do, maybe it is literally I think one time we literally just had a 2 minutes of silence when we started a meeting. We're like, all right, everyone, we're going to be kind of virtually holding hands.
Mm-hmm.
Let the day go. Get yourself into a better headspace. We're here to be creative and to have fun and to kind of think and latch back onto what we talked about last week. So if you just acknowledge that
Yeah.
that's difficult to do.
Yeah, because it is. Yeah, that's a great. I mean, I think that's a great kind of pro tip, because folks can be so distracted in remote working. I'm supposed to be in this meeting, but I'm getting pinged over here, right? And it's hard to kind of set up those walls and barriers.
Well, especially for this theme that you've got here about what does digital transformation mean for us. I mean, you're trying to reinvent certain things or redo things. Transformation is just it's not just a word. It's got a great meaning there. So you're exploring, and you've got to find that way to get into a bit of an exploratory space. It's not just going to, you're not going to call that stressful call that you just had up until 3:30, and it's not just another meeting to hop into.
Yeah. Well, and I think this is what's interesting about the industry that you guys are in and your specific experience, because a lot of folks, that I talk with, innovation is synonymous with software development, like building a digital product or a platform. And when I think about, your background in architecture and all of the kind of approaches that people are taught within that to kind of design, form and function to solve some problem, right, for people, commercial, residential, what have you. You're looking at that in terms of, you have this complex service business that is reselling other people's products, but working with those companies to understand their next release and these things. And you're taking this, essentially design thinking approach to how do we look at every element of our business and every element of the future opportunity space that are these partners that we're a strong sales channel for, the selling. And there's a lot of analogies in my thinking around designing professional services businesses, where you can take all the lean startup stuff. You don't necessarily have to have a product, but a lot of businesses that are service oriented are built on other people's products, right?
Oh my gosh, 100%.
You know what I mean? And that, in a sense, makes you product oriented. You're just focusing on the broader holisticness of the enablement of that product to be, viable in the world.
I remember when we were first engaging with you and your team, that one of the conversations I think Jeremy and I had with you was what experience would a consultant like you bring to the table from different industries that could help us think differently about something we do. I'm not, I wouldn't want, you wouldn't want to deal with one automobile manufacturer and then deal with another one and do kind of the same thing. There's obviously legal ramifications to that, but beyond that, there is no clear-cut example. But it was interesting to learn about another kind of industry or different industries that were doing maybe it was about process improvement, and we could immediately extrapolate how it would apply to how we do our work.
Well, and I think, listening to the themes out of your conversation, a friend of mine who runs a bunch of Chick-fil-A's was talking about their goal, how the Chick-fil-A sets goals and how their positioning in the market is to be the most amazing customer experience, like even more so than the food, just friendly people that are welcoming to you, that every interaction that you have with the company, you just feel like that just made me feel a little bit more positive in my day. And the food is like the caboose on the train, where it's just fascinating thing. But when you think about getting that message out, from corporate into the field, what does that really mean on the ground with training programs and all these other things that are really required, right? When a naive view might say, well, you're just frying chicken, right? Where you're actually, it's this human capital development plan of the associates. How do we create that people want to work at Chick-fil-A, and that joy they have for their, being part of a team and something that excels translates to that joy comes literally from the person behind the counter to the person picking up the food. And
which I think absolutely comes back to this digital transformation term, that sometimes the digital component is really in the passenger seat. Mm-hmm. Because you're trying to figure out, you're working on how to transform what it is that you do and do it differently. The digital process, the digital tools and mechanisms really just help you manifest that. Talking about Chick-fil-A, I don't know when the last time was you went through a drive-through there. It wasn't that long ago for me, but oh my God, it's like clockwork. It's flawless, and it's such a simple, and everyone working there is very kind. And
I'll definitely have to try to get a formal chat going with them as well. But look, Raj, this has been a great conversation. I
hope. Yeah.
I appreciate, again, one of the interesting things I find about these conversations is folks are coming from so many different starting points, right? Folks that were in, finance, folks that were in engineering, folks that were in design, yourself in architecture. And, the common theme was like going from making things to making the process for making things and bringing this kind of sense of connection together in these companies. I can't wait to go rewatch this conversation and catch some of the notes. I have the benefit of being able to catch up with you, I guess, whenever I want to as well. So we'll have to do that. But any parting thoughts that you have before we let you go here, that if you had to give one piece of advice, if you were kind of in the elevator and someone asked you what they do or said that they were, hey, I'm getting ready to join a firm and do what you started to do 2.5 years ago. Any thoughts come to mind as we land the plane?
The one thought that comes to mind, which is probably just at its core, is kind of who I am. I think I actually have some label around this on my LinkedIn profile, but it just rings true to me. It comes back into my mind every week. My goal, and I would hope that people are looking to digitally transform whatever that means, because they're trying to make a process or a product or whatever it might be a little simpler. They're trying to simplify the experience. We're trying to make it a little better, which means it's probably simpler,
Mm-hmm.
But my little tagline that everyone kind of teases me for, which is just so true, is that the process of simplification is complicated,
Mm-hmm.
And so digital transformation, don't get frustrated or intimidated by it because it's complicated.
Yeah.
You've got to be really enjoy problem solving, and that's where this is an extension of architecture. That's kind of like you said before. You may have been dealing more with spatial problem solving as an architect, but you've got to kind of enjoy that a little bit, I think. So.
Yeah, I tell folks, when they ask me similarly, that I never would have thought that art school would have been the perfect primer for this kind of career, but being able to stare at that blank canvas and just get started, and then know you just got to paint, a lot of canvases before you get to some of the the bigger kind of masterpieces is valuable. Well, Raj, really, thank you for your time today. I always enjoy chatting with you. And it's great to kind of come in at a different angle at a business that's core isn't software development, but is just evaluating other folks' technologies, building sets of partners, but also building a great culture internally to just, like you said, stay open to new ideas and try to really create value. So thanks again. It's been a great conversation.